Brilliant. Now you can rugby tackle them as they work their way through the conference and ask them a lot more questions. So this next session is very exciting, very much on topic, having captured, I think, the imagination and attention of frontline clinicians and national policymakers. So we have Richard Samuel, former National Director of Outpatient Recovery and Transformation NHS England, joined by Rod Joyce, Deputy Director of Digital Transformation NHS England, and Ralph Mitchell from St George's University Hospital's NHS Foundation Trust to explore how the NHS can commission, procure, and scale ambient scribing reasonably and at pace in an increasingly crowded supply market. But I'm going to hand over to Richard, Rod, and Ralph. Who do I go to?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll let you all have a minute or two to get settled. So no rush. Yes, it's fantastic. So I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but we are slide free today. So make of that what you will. We will endeavour to be candid and open, but you won't have any slides to draw upon. So my name is Richard Samuel. I formerly was National Director of Outpatient Elective Recovery and Transformation with NHS England, retired for a bit and now come back to do some advisory work on digital in the 10-year plan. I've got colleagues with me who I'll introduce in a second, but thank you for joining today because we're going to be discussing, I think, the commissioning and scaling of ambient scribe technology across the NHS. And it's fantastic to see such a strong turnout today, which I think reflects just how quickly this area has moved from interesting innovation to genuine system priority. Over the past 18 months, ambient scribing has captured the imagination of both frontline services and national leaders, and I think it's testament to the message. I think certainly when I went to some of the early spring conferences, seeing Vin Dawaka stand up and talk about just the centrality of ambient scribe and ambient voice in his priority list, and that's just continued to grow momentum and focus. And what started as automated note-taking is rapidly maturing into a kind of foundational capability for the NHS, a way of freeing clinical time, improving documentation quality, and creating the conditions for more advanced AI automation across our workforce. But with that opportunity comes a real set of challenges, and we now have a very fast-growing supplier market, a rapidly evolving regulatory framework, and crucially a need for consistent standards so that trusts can procure safely, confidently, but also at pace. So at the same time as kind of providers like Ralph on the ground are trying to understand what good looks like, how evidence benefits, and how to implement solutions that work in their clinical environments. So today's panel brings together, I think, exactly the right people to examine these questions. We're joined by Rod Joyce, who's Deputy Director of Digital Transformation and Programme Director in NHS England for ambient voice technology. And Rod is going to give you a really clear view of the direction of travel that NHS England are doing to assist in kind of local development and deployment of ambient voice. And also joined by Ralph Mitchell from St George's University Hospital's NHS Foundation Trust, who is right in the middle of a live procurement process. So Ralph will give you a view of the processes he's going through. It will be constrained, obviously, because he is in the middle of a procurement cycle, but a view as to how he has gone about the kind of procurement cycle of ambient voice. And at the end of this session, there'll be an opportunity for you to pose questions, and we'll also pick up some questions prompted by these sessions. So without any delay, a huge welcome to Rod Joyce.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everybody. So as Rich said, my name is Rod Joyce. I'm Deputy Director of Digital Transformation at NHS England. And I started looking at AVT a few months ago. I technically sit in the digital primary care team and started looking at AI and automation across general practice. And just the opportunity that it presented general practice and started to then have various conversations. How do we scale a technology in general practice? And then suddenly looked at the history of the way that we scale and deploy things across the NHS, thinking, well, why are we looking at one care setting specifically? This is not a care setting specific piece of technology or capability that we're looking at. This is very much a cross-care setting and capability we're trying to build. So that sort of conversation then broadened outside general practice into various other conversations that are happening. So now we're looking at the use of AVT and its capability across all care settings. From general practice all the way through to community and neighbourhoods, just making sure that we're looking at the same standards and the same level of capability that we're trying to put in. But we are still looking at a very, very simple version of what we think of AVT's capability is in transcription, summarization and suggested coding. As Richard was saying, this is very much the beginning of the opportunity, but there is good evidence that actually there is value in scaling that technology in that use case right now. So instead of us thinking about how we deliver the full integrated workflow capability somewhere down the line, there's an opportunity for us to generate capability within the system. And we talk about sort of unicorn technologies a lot, but this one is the one, as Richard said, it's frontline. Our frontline clinicians are really, really keen to use it. It's given them capacity and given them time back and more time for direct care. But at the same time, our seniors and our ministers and government actually are really keen to support it as well. So it puts a bit of a pinch point on actually how we look at the capability and delivery. But as Richard also said, that AI really starts to change the way that we're starting to look at how we deliver care and the patient experience. And AVT has a real opportunity to be the central part of that. We're looking very much at AVT and AI triage as one of the big opportunities and how those two things start to work together. Because if we're starting to put less people into a general practice flow, for example, and we're increasing the quality of the interactions the patients are having, those two things together actually will deliver a much, much greater benefit. So it's not, but that's easy to say, and it's not just about the technology that we're trying to look at. This is about, we're trying to scale what is a Class 1 medical device to every frontline piece, capability and staff and workforce across the system. And we've never really done that before. So this isn't about license funding and pump priming the system. This is actually going to be about the change management, the training, the implementation, the post-market surveillance, but also then the performance monitoring. So performance monitoring in AI is a thing that actually is really, really challenging. And a lot of the AI suppliers are using AI to then market homework. So we need to really be clear about the capability and the standards we're trying to create. And the challenge we've had from our new DG is, what is our COVID-style response to the scaling of this product? Which is great because I've worked with Richard during COVID and I've worked with probably many other colleagues during COVID about the style and the pace that we need to move at now to actually do the things we need to do whilst working in a far more partnership-led approach. As I said, the evidence is there for AVT and triage and various other AI technologies, both from a productivity perspective, both from a care quality perspective, and from a workforce reduction and workforce burden and cognitive load perspective. So we might hear, there's a difference, I think, with regards to how that's realised in general practice, how that's realised in outpatients, and how that's realised in A&E, and the blend will always be different. But the capability we're trying to deliver is still the same. So the two things that we've been working on, so from a tactical perspective, what we were very aware of is that our regional leads and our ICB leads were saying, there are hundreds of suppliers knocking on our door every single day saying, buy my AVT technology, it's the greatest thing we've ever created, and it's going to transform the way the system works. I saw lists with hundreds of suppliers on it. The system was telling us, look, we don't know who to use, what's good, what's safe, what do standards look like around this work. So we worked with a lot of the regional leads and the ICB leads to be able to then say, okay, what is our national model for AVT? So it's as simple as, we have a standard in DTAC as a baseline criteria, MHRN Class 1, MHRA Class 1, and evidence of impact in the system. And then we've started to identify what we think the future standards that we need are around emission rates and hallucination rates and model drift, etc. But also the performance monitoring and the post-market surveillance monitoring these suppliers need to have. So we launched that through the AVT registry a couple of weeks ago. We're going through that process now, and that will streamline, can't tell you how many, but that will streamline the capabilities and the suppliers in the system for us to be able to proactively work with those suppliers to take it beyond the first use case and into other use cases, into neighborhood use cases, offline capabilities, fully integrated workflow capabilities into EPR. So we're going to be able to do that. Still aiming to have that ready for the end of the year and published in early January. But that's very much the first tactical piece we did. The second piece now is actually how we're looking at the strategic piece, how we're moving into an SR period and getting long-term investment into these technologies. And again, it's not really about the technology or the license costs, it's the change management, the implementation, and the support we need to give to our systems to be able to continually do these things. We're working very closely with our regions. Southwest, for example, are doing something around really analysing the science and the scientific impact around LLMs and passing, for example, the same queries into the LLM every single day across multiple platforms at different times a day, at different background noise, with different variables. And we're starting to understand how these things systems are performing, which is really interesting because the performance of these things are the things that we hear from the front line that people are really worried about the most. So those are the things we're doing. We're trying to build that capability. We, as I said, from a COVID response position, what we're trying to do is say, we know we can't deliver this from the centre. Hopefully people I've worked with in the past know that's not what we're trying to do. This needs to be a partnership model, and not us just sitting in the centre of that. We need to work with our regions, our ICBs, with the MHRA, the NIHR, and various other organisations. But we also need suppliers to be part of that. So everybody is accountable for the delivery of the impact of these technologies. And how we work then, maybe you can talk a bit more about what those procurement models look like in the future around value-based procurement and outcome-based procurements that we need to start building with science overlaid around the capabilities and the technologies we want to be able to sort of challenge our supplier market on a little bit more and be more accountable across the board for the impact that we have. So I will stop there. I will pass over, but I think we're going to open some questions after that. So thank you very much, and we'll answer your questions shortly.
Thank you. So my name's Ralph Michel. I'm Chief Transformation Officer at St George's and Epsom St Helier hospitals in southwest London. But we are in the midst of a collaborative procurement for ambient voice technology with Kingston, two neighbouring hospitals, Kingston and Croydon. So we're doing a joint procurement as a group of 5 hospitals who together deliver about 3 million outpatient appointments a year and just under 700,000 A&E attendances. We're mid-procurement, which means I have to be a little bit constrained about what I say, but also means I'm very much not here claiming to be a leading light for people to learn from. We will see whether we are successful in the way that we want to be, but I will share some of the things that we're grappling with. So I'll start just by saying a little bit about why we're so enthusiastic about ambient voice technology. We trialled AVT in our emergency department at St George's and saw a 13% increase in the number of patients each clinician could see in a shift, significant reductions in the amount of time it took to document, to complete clinical notes, and improvements in flows. So a 7% reduction in the amount of time it took to get from the point where a clinician assignment to a patient being clinically ready to proceed, as well as improvements for our clinicians, so improvements in the kind of cognitive burden, and what our clinicians said to me is that it also improves the interaction between clinician and patient. And when you think about the strategic context that we're in as NHS organisations of demand rising and funding rising less fast, and our biggest single, we're a people business, the single biggest expenditure for us is our clinical workforce. Any technology that has that kind of potential to improve the productivity of our clinical workforce and the happiness of our clinical workforce is a big deal. So I'm just going to talk about 4 things that we have grappled with as a partnership of hospitals in South London as we've sought to procure ambient voice technology. So the first question was, do we go it alone or in partnership? So it definitely would have been quicker for any one of our 4 organisations to go it alone. And I have no doubt that every single one of those 4 organisations will have felt or will feel in the coming months at some point, God, I wish we'd done this not in partnership. Unquestionably, it made it slower. But we decided to go in partnership on the basis that we would learn from each other, which we definitely have. I think we are, we have got a better process and are clearer about what we want as a result from working together. And we also took a very conscious decision to work at scale. I talked about the 3 million outpatient appointments a year that we deliver. We consciously decided we would seek to be attractive to the supplier market as a large opportunity in the hope that that would get us a good deal, and we will see whether that turns out to be true. Second question that we've grappled with is where on the spectrum to go between trying this out, small pilots, testing this product, testing that one, versus betting big on one supplier, one product, procuring that and going with it. And grappled with that in a context where the market is changing very fast. So yes, hundreds of suppliers, but also more every day. I know that if we started our procurement now, that the market would look different to how it looked when we started it only a few months ago. We took the decision to go towards the bet big end of the spectrum. And we did that because we took the view that there's a risk of pilotitis, just lots and lots of little pilots. You need to do some of this stuff at scale and change the way you do your business to get some of the benefits out. And I think we also felt that to the point about change management, we needed to be serious about this, make it a big priority for our organisations, rather than having it as a kind of accretion, an extra, a small extra. Third question for us was about the importance of integration with our electronic patient record. We took a very conscious decision in our procurement to put quite a lot of weight on that. We were really clear that we wanted the solution that we procure to be able to integrate with our EPR. We're all 4 hospitals on the same EPR, which helps. Our strong sense is that that is where the value, or a lot of the value, will come from, but we also know it will be really difficult. And I have no doubt that as we get into implementation, the speed at which we can do that will be one of the things that one of the challenges that we face. And then the fourth question that we've thought quite a lot about is how much to procure in a very traditional way a clearly defined product from a supplier and have a very traditional buyer-supplier relationship versus saying to ourselves, in the rapidly changing market that we've got, we want to procure a strategic partner who we can work with as their technology evolves, and who we can work with to develop what that looks like and to implement it together. And we have tried to do more of the latter, but found it is, as I'm sure you'll all know, much easier to say and to hope to do than to do in practice in the NHS. So I'll stop there and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Ralph. Look, we're going to hear more from both of you because that was a brilliant kind of entrance into this space, which is heavily nuanced. Just out of interest, I'd love a show of hands here in the room if you are working in an NHS or local government organisation interested in the procurement of ambient voice. So a few, and in from the supplier sector. Don't have to. Fantastic. And the rest interested parties. Well, let's kind of dwell into a few of the kind of questions. Have we got another microphone we can grab? I'm going to ask a few questions. If I could just pass that to Rod and Ralph, and then if you could get your questions ready for the panel. I guess a key question for me, and we've seen this. I'll own this from an NHS England perspective. We've seen the huge challenge between the short-term tactical value of delivering a technology which is primed for today versus the long-term evolution of the strategic value of what might be capable in 18 months, 2 years. And the speed of AI capability is such that that's not like a hypothetical question. That's a very real question. What we will be able to do in the next 18 months to 2 years in ambient voice will be very different to what we can do today. How do you, maybe Ralph, start with Ralph, how have you balanced that? I guess it's playing into the strategic partnership relationship rather than specifying and locking down a tender framework which dictates now, but how have you gone about doing that?
Is this working? Yeah. So we've, I suppose, two ways in which we tried to do that. One is in terms of what we've specified we want. So we've sought to do a balance of saying we do want the technology that we can see right now to be deployed in 2 clinical settings in particular, our emergency departments and all our outpatient clinics. So we've been really, really clear that is one thing that we are definitely buying. But we've also said we want to, in effect, buy a strategic partner who can work with us as this technology evolves to deploy it in other areas, in other ways, some of which we cannot see now. And in our procurement, we've asked suppliers to tell us about what they see that journey looking like and how they would like to travel with us on it. So that's one way we've sought to do that, the balance. And then the other is a kind of boring one of contract length, where we've tried to balance, making this a sufficiently long contract opportunity that a partner can invest in, with making it not so long that we're locked into something when who knows how the world will look in 5 years' time.
That's really, and Rod, I know that ministers and top of office can be quite impatient about realising value, but how do you avoid creating a model where we get locked into short-term tactical gains and not reap the huge dividends in the medium term?
Very good question. I think just to reflect on that, I think building those partnerships actually with suppliers is absolutely critical, I think, because what we can do then is share a lot of that knowledge across the whole system in a way that we sort of do in various places, but we don't do really, really well. And there's this balance that we always have to play between supporting genuine new innovation in the system and the SMEs, all the way through to some of the big EPR providers and the capabilities they bring. So we're always trying to balance that and actually understand what does integration look like. And I think integration plays a key part in the way that we need to deliver AVT. Our CCI has been very clear that integration is a real enabler of AVT. We've got evidence and pilots, and I think we need to reframe the way we use the word pilot, but we'll talk about that another day, about why integration is so important. But we also know there's challenges. Primary care is slightly easier, but with legacy APIs in IM1, secondary care a lot harder, big dependencies. So I think the flexibility you talk about is actually what you really, really need to focus on, because but then you may then end up working with some of the larger suppliers, and some may be the less innovative and slightly slower. So it's that balance. What we want to do is support our systems to be able to buy the right technologies at the right time for them, to deploy the right use case, as you said, across clinical consultation, which is where the use case is right now. But actually, if we are then piloting in the Southwest, the use in neighborhoods and offline capabilities in people's homes with poor tech and poor connectivity, that is scaled and shared, and that capability isn't just a Southwest capability or just an ICB there, that we are then sharing that knowledge and that experience everywhere. So we're building it iteratively together, but we are having to build this at a pace that we've probably not seen before. I was saying to Richard before, I was at a Microsoft event not long ago, and the stuff that's coming is genuinely transformative, but also genuinely terrifying in the way that we try and deploy this stuff. We see it in other industries are deploying things a lot quicker than health. We need to figure out how we get to that point. But we talk about infrastructure, we talk about architecture, we talk about interoperability, things we've talked about for 10 years plus in the NHS. And it's just questioning each of those things along the way to say, do we now need to fix these things, or are some of these capabilities that are coming in transforming the way that we need to think as well about deploying the tech? So I think it's that flexibility that I actually think changes the way that we do this.
And can I just pick up, I'm genuinely interested, because when we say integration, I think we can see integration being on a spectrum of maybe just a read capability over here through to full deep integration. Could either of you hazard to kind of articulate what you mean by integration in
it
this
genuinely
setting?
depends who you talk to. I think I was having this conversation with our DG the other day, and we were clear that integration is absolutely critical to AVT realizing its benefits of creating the capacity to release that capacity into our benefits. But there is that, as you said, there's a point-to-point data integration between an EPR and a third party that is passing data from point to point as safely and as securely as possible, because it's so, this data is confidential data. It's very close to the patient, very close to the clinical workflow, which those technologies exist now. But if you just fast forward 18 months and imagine where AVT is going to be, it's that full, deep, integrated capability that we have that is from the first encounter of the patient to the discharge of that patient, all the way through that experience, through that referral process, through determining, where's the capacity for the X-ray, where's the capacity in phlebotomy, have they had the right things before the consultation, or the follow-up is then created. So it's that end-to-end workflow that we definitely have to get to, because that is absolutely transformative, and it is really, really interesting. But it's whose responsibility is it to set the capabilities and the capabilities we want to be able to deliver, and are they capabilities from innovators, are they capabilities from EPRs, or do we finally get to the point where we're saying, we could say this is the capabilities we need as a system, and these third-party organizations are going to work together to be able to say, well, here's our EPR, we're working with these suppliers, and we're coming back to you with solutions that actually work as an integrated offering. And I think that's where we definitely need to get to.
Any thoughts?
I don't have a lot to add to that, but I suppose this, for me, would be another example of where we've defined a minimum that we want, but then are expecting there to be a kind of exciting future which we could not and should not attempt to specify now, that we hope we'll get to through strategic partnership.
I'm going to be really unfair to Rod now, so he can kick me afterwards. But I observe whenever we set out on these sort of journeys, the regulatory environment struggles to move at the pace of which we, the service, want it to move at, and I'm interested in the issue of risk here. So, and again, it's been a while since I commissioned transcription services but I know elective care very well, and I know some of the risk that exists in elective care, because I think, as Ralph, you said, the capacity constraints, the challenges of delivering care to patients when we have a backlog of waits. And I fear that some of the challenge we face is that and this isn't me being cavalier, but it's one of the challenges, we apply a very high threshold of risk to digital tools against a kind of a score of perfection, whereas in the real world, we know that we have our transcription services aren't particularly that accurate. We know that we have patients experiencing harm whilst waiting for care. How do we find what is an acceptable balance, Rod, between that level of risk?
Good question. I think so obviously we're very much managed by the MHRA in the risk profile that we put against the technology. And we work really closely with them just to really understand through the national model and the registry what is the requirement for the use of transcription, clinical summarization, and suggested coding. And we have to be very particular in the way that we talked about certain things. And obviously the human in the loop remains the critical part in the use of that as a Class 1 medical device. But we know, as I said, if we could just fast forward a bit, we know we're talking about capabilities that in the existing model would certainly be a two-way capability in the not too distant future about that workflow, about that automation part of that workflow. So we're working really closely with them. We're working very closely with them as part of the commission they're working on at the moment. They've been very public to say AVT is very much part of that. Where does that go? Obviously, I don't want to speculate too much, but we know that MDR and digital has always been a challenge. I think MDR plus digital plus AI is going to be a much bigger challenge. We've seen the same in RCTs and various other things about the way we want to demonstrate impact of digital. But again, being able to freeze AI frameworks and LLM models to do RCTs for 12 months is just not possible anymore. So we need to change the way that the system works to help support the pace of the technology. But that's always the hard bit. But one of the other bits from a liability perspective is, again, one of the regions is looking at the moment for us around how do we de-risk general practice. We know that GPs don't really care about DCB 129s. They don't care about DPIAs as much. They do, but they don't. And understanding what the need is at a GP practice level. So they're starting to look at actually how do we share that liability and how do we share that risk and empower the front line to focus on the delivery of the care and actually getting others to then share the liability of the risk that we carry using the technologies. So again, that's part of the work that we're working on with our regional colleagues at the moment, because that doesn't just apply to general practice, then that applies to our clinicians across the board. Probably less in secondary care because I think they're far more adept at it. But if we're starting to think about how we take this out to the community in mental health, it's going to be exactly the same challenges that we have there. So when we start to deploy the technology, we can actually limit the amount of risk that they're carrying as a consequence. So there's nothing concrete in that space, but I think those are the sort of things I think that we can do more nationally and regionally to help support the front line, use the technology and worry about delivering care. Did I skirt it around enough?
I'm sure that's good. I guess a question for both of you then, and then I'll open it up to questions from the floor as well. I guess, Ralph, you must have done your due diligence going out and looking and it's a fairly nascent capability, but when you're out in the field looking at who's been working in this, what were the kind of conditions for success that you identified that you wanted to bring into the kind of the consortia? Because this isn't about licensing, is it? This is about, as you said, fundamentally changing the way in which we work. So it'd be interesting to kind of see how you're paralleling your procurement model with your preparing your workforce, preparing your infrastructure, and Rod, if you've got any thoughts about where you've been out and about, what are the lessons learned or conditions for success?
Good question. So in parallel to the procurement, we've been doing a lot of clinical engagement, where actually I would say, a lot of our clinicians are using this technology already. A lot of them are using it in private practice, and they're desperate for us just to get on and make it available to them. And many of them, I suspect, are using it in our hospitals on the quiet. So we shouldn't kid ourselves about what those dynamics look like. As important, I guess, is the engagement that we've been doing with the non-clinical workforce who are part of this, and booking admin and booking teams, and then one of the things that we are that's very live for us at the moment is how we will do this across Southwest London, and the degree to which we try and construct this as 4 trust level change processes versus doing it collectively across Southwest London. And there are definitely things where we can see value in doing them once across Southwest London, and others where it's going to make much more sense to localise, which we're working through now.
And as you're passing over to Rod, I guess that's the value of not doing it in pilot mode, in that the risk of doing nothing is actually that individual clinicians just adopt this by stealth, and without the safeguards, without the guardrails, without the operating structure, you end up exposing the organisation to greater risk than if you were just pursuing at pace. So it is a balance, right?
Yeah, and I said earlier, I touched on about pilot. It's okay to pilot. It's okay that we do that stuff, but as long as we then fulfil the benefit of the pilot, and we don't just stop and go, well, that was interesting, and because we're seeing lots and lots of those things, and they say, oh, we've got evidence now, but now we need to go figure out how we fund it. I think we need to fundamentally change. It's okay to pilot as we deploy, and we pilot new opportunities, new use cases, new challenges as we go. So, but I was thinking I totally agree the people are using it in the wild. All I want is to make sure people are using it safely, and they're using it in a way that actually protects the workforce and protects patients. That's basically all we're trying to do and make sure we do. That actually then creates the capacity or creates the outcome and the benefit that we actually believe it can. And there's a challenge between whilst we talked about, from a unicorn perspective, everybody wants it. Everybody probably wants it for slightly different reasons. So we know from a central perspective, a national perspective, it's about probably creating a capacity and productivity. And from a workforce perspective, it's actually saying, I can actually finish my clinics within an hour of when it was meant to finish. I can reduce the burden that I'm experiencing and the cognitive load. So it's striking the balance between utilizing capacity for productivity, which we believe it can, focusing on care quality and increasing the direct care that we're giving to patients. Again, we're seeing more people with long-term conditions, that things are far more complex now, but also then reducing the burden on the workforce. And we're seeing different care settings, as I said earlier, different care settings are blending that mix differently. But I think if we can get to a point where it's producing outcomes across those three areas, then I think everybody starts to win from the technology.
Yeah, and that plays, Rod, doesn't it, to your statement in your session, which talked about how do we create different types of contractual are they value-based, are they outcome-based, what are the outcomes, how do we measure them, are they, because that's a complex field, right?
It is really complex, but as I said, it's easy for us to say, let's buy the technology, buy the license, and we deploy it, and then it's kind of like, oh yeah, well, we didn't really know what we were trying to do with it. If we can be really clear that if there is investment associated with it, this is what we expect to see from it, this is how we want it reported. But as I said, we can do that, we can put the pressure on the system to be able to do that, but we also need to put pressure on the suppliers, and some of them are in the room, to be able to be responsible for delivering those outcomes as well, and actually create that partnership that we were talking about.
Yeah, and you only have to open the HSJ to see two core themes shining through, don't we, which is an absolute lack of, nationally, a lack of tolerance to poorly deployed digital tools which don't deliver value, be they performance, productivity, quality, but also an absolute lack of tolerance, rightly so, to risk being exposed through poorly deployed digital tooling. So the burden on all of us involved in this space is to both deliver safe, high-quality services, but deliver outcomes as defined by, and which is no easy feat, and that's why it's as much around the wraparound conditions for success as it is about the technical capability of the tool itself. So look, I've got a whole raft of even more complex and tricky questions that go into it, but I'd really value any questions from the floor. Have we got a microphone? I'm happy to give up mine
here. Hi. Hello. Yeah, thanks very much. Very interesting. It's quite insightful, that. A couple of observations which you probably touched on. The medico-legal aspect, I'm not sure who's covering that, which features into two comments I have experience of, because I praise doctors and things. One is reluctance to adopt the technology because of fears of the medico-legal implications. And the second is trainees not wishing to join practices who don't have the technology because they like to read the bedtime story and get home in the evening. So I just thought it was interesting whether you've come across that in your, analysis. And just for good measure, Moore's law went from 2 years to 3 months. So the rapid development of AI and technology is months, not years. Thank you.
We need to. I'm gonna stand by the speaker next time because it wasn't. But I think what you said was the first. Every other. But just try the first question. Just reframe that again for me.
It was just. The whole point. Tech in the NHS is all about impactability and adoption.
Yes.
So without those, you're stuffed, and a lot of staff just hate anything new, even if it's going to help them.
Yes.
So the impactability and adoption here was some people not wishing to adopt because they're fearful of the medico-legal obligation, implications, etc. I think that's a valid point. And then you have people younger than myself who are joining practices who won't join the practice if they're not adopting these technologies.
Yes.
So that was the point. And the final point about people doing stuff, everyone walks around using their mobile phones.
Yeah.
So where's the regulation in that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so maybe we pick up the first question. In fact, let's get the question from the back whilst you guys are thinking about it. But if you could think about how do we balance that kind of the bell curve of adoption versus resistance and the medico-legal management of this risk issue, and actually whether, again, we're class MHRA class 1, right? So we're not are we using autonomous deployment of AI? We're using it in a slightly different setting. So if we could think about that, and then if we could get the microphone to the gentleman in the middle there, that'd be fantastic. I'm getting old now, so I'm going to go and stand by the speaker to hear.
Thank you. My name is Parth, and I'm building a AI platform helping trainee doctors to be orthopedic surgeon, and I'm heavily using transcribing in our platforms. And my question to you guys is, have you come across one of the best LLM models which works well for medical field? Because I'm using Gemini and I'm not happy with it. So it's a very practical question, and I wanted to see, are there any basic LLMs or any specific LLMs which you guys recommend?
Right. So I'm not sure whether they're going to get a direct answer from the panel on which LLM is best. I'd like to, and maybe you get them in a corner, they might say, but at this stage I suspect they're going to give a balanced position on that. So UK starting with that one, and then we'll get on to the balancing the bell curve of adoption and resistance.
So I probably don't have an answer specifically, but I think the bit that I'm really interested in that the Southwest region are doing at the moment is, as I said earlier, that scientific analysis. So being able to really understand how these LLMs are performing. Because it's easy for us to say, you need a DTAC, you need a class 1, you need these capabilities. It's easy for people to tick that checkbox and say, oh, therefore I should be on the procurement list. It's how are they performing? And what they're doing is passing the same queries, as I said, every single hour, every single day, with background noise, with variation on it, to actually see how the LLM is performing. And then I think we'll start to be able to understand what good looks like. Because I don't think we really do yet. We're very reliant on our supplier market to be able to do that. We need to know what good looks like to determine if there are future standards around LLMs that we need to introduce. To do that, we need the evidence, we need the empirical and scientific evidence to be able to do that. And we're starting to look at what that looks like. It's some really fascinating results, but it's very, very early days. A lot of suppliers are doing it themselves, but we need to obviously then take a view of that slightly more holistically. But we don't have a particular sort of LLM preference.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to duck the LLM question. But on the bell curve, I think you're right. I'd recognise both sides of it that you described. Part of our thinking, but very much, is that we feel pretty soon, if we don't have this kind of technology, we will be a less attractive place to work. I think for the whole thing, in my view, adopting at scale helps. So we are adopting at scale because then, in a sense, we have to do it well. which helps across the board. And part of the fear about not doing that, with the reservations that some people will inevitably have, is what we don't want is a kind of jungle of different systems, different ways of doing it, that our organisations have to live with and pay for.
Thank you. So look, I'm going to finish on that note, but I think it's a critically important one. If I was to observe my time, 10, 15 years as a chief exec locally and then nationally at NHS England in a leadership role, I suspect history won't look so kindly on our interactions with our clinical community, insofar as we've almost relentlessly reduced the administrative wraparound around our clinicians and used as a proxy poorly deployed, disconnected digital tools, and then said, get on with it and see how you thrive. And typically it's created a burden on our clinical community as opposed to an enabler. And I think, may you call me naive or you call me optimistic, but I genuinely believe that ambient voice is a huge asset to the clinician and removes some of those clunky UI and UX challenges that we've seen through the rollout of a previous sets of technology. So it is incumbent on us, it's incumbent on Rod, it's on Ralph, to make sure that this one doesn't turn into a burden on the clinical community, but turns into a liberating asset for the community, because I'm not sure we've done brilliantly over the years in terms of at-pace deployments without thinking that through. So just a massive thank you for you. I hope it was interesting and helpful. A massive thank you to Ralph for the really helpful practical experiences. I don't think there's a right or a wrong way, but I think I really like your honest appraisal of how you've gone about it. And we wish you huge luck. And as one of the first scale deployments, we'll watch and learn accordingly. And to Rod as well for your candor around the role of NHS England in this space, and certainly for me a fundamentally different approach, which is acting on behalf of what the needs of colleagues like Ralph are looking for, rather than telling them what they want. So thank you. I don't underestimate the challenge you have, but I also recognise the huge value of what you're trying to deliver. So thank you so much, and a round of applause for Rod and Ralph.
Well, that was a really, really excellent session on ambient scribing.